Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today I'm actually making a chicken on a pan as a gift for a friend of mine, but this is not the chicken that I used in her gift, but I just wanted to show you all really quick how I make my chickens. Now I will link a video in the description for when I made some earlier chickens, and it'll even share with you how I made some chickens years ago and how I've improved. Now, with each attempt of anything you do in miniature, you will get better. Practice makes perfect, so give yourself some grace if this is your first attempt. So in general, I always begin by making the body or the torso of the chicken. Now, dolls, I use the word chicken very loosely. It could be a capon, a quail, a Cornish hen, or a turkey. The concept is the same. Now, you can take as much or as little time as far as detailing your bird as you need to, or if you work on it a while and get tired, that's the wonderful thing about working with polymer clay. You can set it aside and come back to it later because it won't harden until you bake it. Now, I'm just using the silicone tool, which I generally use when I'm making my dolls, but it's really a really nice aid as you're smoothing and shaping your bird to get like a blended effect when you're adding the legs and the wings. Now here I am kind of just pinching off a little part here to create my leg or the drumstick. Now, historically I used to make my drumsticks pretty big and they would kind of look like something from the Flintstones, but I've since learned to make them a little bit more petite and slimmer to make them actually match the proportions of an actual chicken. Because if you really think about it, a chicken is not a really big bird. Now take your time with this. Don't rush. It's not a race. Now take time and pay attention to the types of legs and wings you're creating to match the type of bird body that you're creating. And here I am attaching the first drumstick or leg to the side of the chicken body. Now you definitely want to focus on this part, blending the drumstick into the body of the chicken to make it look as though there's skin attached. I really like this color or this shade of clay because I think it really mimics and gives the impression of uncooked or raw chicken. Now after you complete the first leg, you're going to go on and do the same thing to the other side, and you want to make sure that both of the legs are pretty uniform so it looks as though they match, and you also want to be careful to make sure that the legs are straight so they won't look as though your chicken or bird has some type of deformity. Now if you need to take time and bake this part and come back to add the rest, you can do that as well. So I want to take a moment to talk to you a little bit about the clay that I'm using. So I'm using the Super Sculpey Living Doll. It's a really wonderful polymer clay, and I think it's a really nice neutral for so many things. But again, I think it's especially nice because it has sort of like a translucent effect. So it comes in handy for so many different things. So it's a tone that I always keep on hand. Now when creating the wings, you want to take extra time to make sure that you don't make them too big, because if you make them too large, they'll be really out of proportion. And you see it next to that leg, it's really too big, so I really need to trim it down quite a bit. Now if you do this, be kind to yourself. It's not a big deal. You just want to trim it down and make it smaller. So you just want to cut away some of the excess to bring it down more into proportion, or to make it smaller than what the actual leg is. And for some reason, sometimes it appears to be small until you actually add it to the body of the chicken, and then it's really clear that it's out of proportion. And even after you add it to the body of the chicken, you can always trim away whatever the excess is to bring it down to size. And you really want to continue to work on it until it looks reasonable. Now you want to check your body of your chicken from all angles to see how it looks from different perspectives, because you don't want it to look good from one angle and then look bad from the other angle. And here I am making another wing, just shaping it out of a V-shaped piece of clay and trimming off the excess to make it in proportion or smaller than the leg or the drumstick. And make sure if you do any trimming or editing to your wing, you make sure you use your silicone tool to smooth out any hard edges to make sure that it blends into the body neatly so that there are no hard, unusual lines. At this point, you're generally done with the making of the body of the bird or the chicken, but I like to add a few little extra details. And again, You can add as much or as little as you want at this point. Again, be conscious to straighten out those legs. But I like to add a little texture to the body of my chicken to give the impression that the feathers have been plucked. I think that's a nice little detail. It's pretty simple to do. And so I use my little brush or wire tool to create those little holes. Now, you don't want to overdo it and give your chicken a coarse texture, but I think a few of those holes really do give the impression that feathers have been plucked. Now at this point, you want to set your bird aside for baking and follow the instructions on the back of your polymer clay package. So I had this piece of packaging plastic that was gifted to me from one of my precious dolls. And I thought it would be the perfect size and shape to be my roasting pan. So I gave it a couple coats of my Tester's paint. And it worked out really nice because the Tester's paint gives sort of like an enamel finish, which works out really nice for so many things. And this color is called aluminum, so I like it because it's not real bright and silvery. Now, it is the best practice to allow testers to dry overnight, especially if you have to do more than one coat, because you want the paint to be completely dry before you move on to the next part. So here I am pulling together a few things that I want to use as my seasonings and spices and even garnish for my little roast chicken. Now, these little green sprigs I normally use for potting or adding to vases or plants, but I thought they would look really nice as garnish and seasoning in my pan. And I'm also using some chalk pastels to further enhance the flavor. So you see I've got the red for the paprika and the black for the pepper. And then I added a little brown and green chalk pastel to enhance the color. And after I chopped up all my spices, I was looking for additional garnish. I have the grapes over there, and you can see here I had created another chicken that I never finished. So maybe I'll do that one today too. So this is the next day, and my pan is all dry, and I'm ready and excited about pulling together all my ideas. Now, before I add it to the pan, I want to add some more tones of brown to make it look roasted. I was going to use the eyeshadow, but I decided to go ahead and stick to my dependable acrylic paint in the color called Real Brown, and I added a few drops of Dimensional Magic for shine. And as I was adding the mixture of Dimensional Magic and acrylic paint to the body of the chicken, I got another idea. I decided to add drippings or the beginning of gravy to the bottom of the pan. So I put a blob of my Real Brown acrylic paint on my table, and then I added a little shot of yellow to make it look a little bit lighter because I didn't want to make it look really thick and opaque. So for the drippings, I blended a combination of the yellow, the brown, and the Dimensional Magic to thin it out, make it sheer, and give it shine. Now, before I added my drippings, I added white glue to the center so I would know exactly where I would position my chicken so I wouldn't get the gravy in that area. So I began to drizzle some of the paint over in the corners and around the side, anywhere I thought the juices from the roast chicken may run while it was cooking. You can do as much or as little of this as you like. This is definitely a thing that you could really get carried away with. And the more I played with it, the more I wanted to do it. But I finally went ahead and added my chicken to the center of the grease where I had added my white glue. And here I am using the same brush with the paint and the Dimensional Magic mixture to add a little glaze and shine to the surface of my bird. And I really do like the look of the bird now with the little glaze on it because there's nothing worse than dry chicken. And when it got to this stage, I was feeling really proud of the gift that I was creating for my friend. And after I felt like I had added enough of the Dimensional Magic to the surface of the skin of my roast chicken, I went on to start to get some of my seasonings in the pan or on top of the bird as well. So I just tapped my finger into some of the chalk pastel and rubbed my fingers together so that the little granules will drizzle on the top of my bird. And I thought it made it look really interesting because I feel like it added texture and color in contrast to the shiny surface of the skin. And I really think it added to the overall look of realism. And dolls, at this point, I was really tickled about the way my gift was turning out. I thought it would look really nice. And I felt it was time for me to add the garnish. Now, I had a lot of additional ideas for the garnish, but I thought this would look really, really cute. Just adding a few sprigs of this green to the pan where the gravy or the grease had run to give the impression that it had just come fresh out of the oven and was ready to eat, instead of all prim, proper, and polished as if it was prepared for display. And to be honest, dolls, I never had a garnished, decorated chicken. They were just seasoned really well and done. And again, this is another part you can really get carried away with because it was so much fun. So at this point, I was really, really glad that I had made more than one chicken so that I won't overdo this one. I can just take all this excited miniature making energy over to another little bird. But the more I played with it, the more amused I got. I started to crumble up some of the little pieces of faux parsley to the top of the turkey. And so let me show you what else happened while I was playing. So I took the exact same type of pan and I trimmed off the rim, and this is what it looked like. And because it was clear, I coated it with a couple coats of gesso so that it would be opaque before I added the layer of white enamel paint. Now, this is my tester's paint. I apologize, dolls. It's probably pretty dry, and so the consistency is pretty glunky. So yeah, I wouldn't advise you to do this. I did, but it's going to work out fine. Now, I should be ashamed to show you this hideous painting job because it's really lumpy and very uneven, but I allowed it to dry overnight. So the next day I pulled out my UV light, and here's my little pan with the coat of the tester's white. And again, it's really, really coarse. It's not smooth or enamel-y looking at all. It's just kind of streaky. But I decided to add a base coat and a top coat of some nail builder gel. Now, dolls, you know I have a tendency to use nail art products for my miniatures. So I added a couple coats of the base so that the top coat will adhere nicely. And I did actually make the coats kind of thick because I really wanted it to cover up all that streaky lumpiness of my dried out enamel paint. And you can kind of see here from this frame that that top coat really covered up my dollhouse crimes, and I'm really, really happy to see it starting to look like enamel at this point. Now, after it was cured solid with the UV light, I was really tickled about the finish and excited about moving to the next part. So I'm going to do the exact same treatment with this. Now, I really like that it was actually firmer than the original plastic. It has a different density with the UV gel on it, and I thought it really looked enamel-y. So I really wanted to make it look like those pans that kind of have the black or the navy blue trim around the edges. So I'm going to stain my chickens. Now, these are 2 chickens that I made in the beginning of the video with the living doll clay. And here I am with my pan, adding a couple dots of the Dimensional Magic by Mod Podge to be my grease or drippings for my roasted chicken. And I'm using the same treatment or technique that I used for the other chicken, adding a thin coat of the real brown acrylic paint to make it look as though it was roasted. Now you can see the finish is slightly different because I made it with the living doll clay instead of my tan colored clay. Now, to add depth to the color, I did allow this first coat to dry and then added another coat of the real brown to give the color more depth. And right there I was showing you the difference between how it looks using the different types of clay. Now, if you glance at the pan, you can see I've added some of my acrylic paint and mixed it with the Dimensional Magic, and I've added my little sprigs of seasoning and parsley to the pan as well. I'm adding my finishing touches of color and the look of roasting to the pan. I actually added a little bit of black to my mixture for this chicken to enhance the roasted effect. Now here I've got a little bit of the Dimensional Magic on my brush to add a little shine or sheen to my chicken, and you see how transformative just that little bit of the Dimensional Magic to make the chicken look as though it's shining or a little bit oily. And now I'm adding a little glue to the center so I can add my chicken. And after I positioned my chicken where I wanted it in the pan, I went on to add a little navy blue paint around the edges or the rim of the pan to give it that dark navy blue trim. I don't really know what those pans are called, but we just call them enamel white pans, but sometimes they were navy blue and sometimes they were black. So I started with the navy blue, but it wasn't giving me the look that I wanted, so I came back with it and added the black. Now, At first, I kind of didn't like the way the black was coming out because it made the pan look a little scrappy. But then after a while, I really liked that the pan looked a little bit weathered and worn because some of the best tasting food comes from old pans. Now, when I had completed and added an ample amount of the black acrylic paint, I went over the top of that with a very thin coat of Dimensional Magic again to seal it in to make it mimic that enameled look on top of the black trim. And here I am adding a little extra paprika for good measure. So dolls, I'm warming up and trying to get back to my projects that were on my table. So bear with me as I get back into the swing of things. So I really appreciate you dolls hanging in there with me during my recovery from my ankle surgery. And I will be doing a video soon to let you know what my plans are for 2025. Now, dolls, if you enjoyed this video today and want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. And always look for me on Mondays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing you right here on Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.